Well, hello. We are going to be covering the first part of Chapter 9, which is the muscular system. This is a pretty in-depth chapter. We're just going to start with the first couple of slides on this section. There are three types of muscles in the muscular system: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Skeletal muscle is the only one of the three that's voluntarily controlled. It's one of the few things actually in our entire body that's voluntarily controlled. It is attached to the skeleton. That's why in general you have a musculoskeletal system which combines those two. Cardiac muscle is obviously found in the heart, and smooth muscle is found in the internal organs and blood vessels. Now, cardiac and smooth muscle, like we said, were non-consciously controlled, involuntarily controlled. And the skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle are both striated. One of the things about cardiac muscle I'd like you to know is that's where there are found intercalated discs. And remember that cardiac muscle, because like skeletal muscle has something to hold on to, it's got muscles at either end, cardiac muscle has to bind to itself. So those desmosomes that we studied way back in some of the first chapters, the connections between the cells that were considered like welding, those are what make up those intercalated discs of cardiac. So skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Skeletal is the only voluntary one. Cardiac and smooth are involuntary. Skeletal and cardiac are striated, where smooth muscle is called smooth muscle because of the lack of striations. Now, skeletal muscles attached to bones, the only area where that is not true is in the face. You'll have a group of muscles called the muscles of facial expression, and they allow you to be able to make emotions. So as a professor, usually when I'm teaching in front of people, it is nice because I can kind of see if they're following or not. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge doing this online. But skeletal muscle, each individual skeletal muscle is an organ in and of itself, and so the muscular system is made up of several skeletal muscles. Now remember, the cardiac muscle is not part of the skeletal system or the muscular system, and neither is smooth muscle. The cardiac muscle is going to be in the cardiovascular system because it's the heart, and the smooth muscle is going to be in various other systems, like the stomach's going to be in the digestive system. The smooth muscle in the arteries and veins are going to be in the cardiovascular system. The smooth muscle that's inside the lungs is part of the respiratory system. So that's the way it's generally broken down. But skeletal muscles are composed of several different things. That's what makes them an organ in and of themselves. They've got skeletal muscle, nervous tissue, blood, and connective tissues. Now, these connective tissue coverings come in a couple different packages. Basically, you've got what's called fascia, which is a very tough outer membrane that covers the muscles. Then it turns into what we call tendons. Tendons are what tie muscles to bone. So anywhere there's a link, anywhere there's a muscle that's attached to a bone, it's a tendon that does that attachment. And then we have what's called aponeurosis. These are kind of special. Aponeurosis are going to be found in the skull. It's what attaches the frontalis to the occipitalis bones. And then inside the rectus abdominis, there's an aponeurosis. Basically what an aponeurosis is instead of having a muscle attached directly to a bone by way of a tendon, this is where two muscles are going to have some kind of connective tissue between them. And so we call that an aponeurosis. Now, muscles are covered with these special coverings that kind of help divide it up. So if we took a muscle and cut it and looked inside, we would see these repeating patterns, and this picture kind of shows it. If we start as the muscle as a whole, if I cut the muscle and looked at it, I'd have an outer fascia that we talked about, and just underneath that we would have a thin layer called epimyosin, epi meaning outside. And so Inside the muscle, once we get internal to the epimyosin, then we'll start seeing these little bundles called fascicles. Fascicles are going to have a surrounding called perimyosin that divides them from other fascicles. And all fascicles are groups of individual muscle cells. So it's this repeating pattern. Inside the fascicle, I've got individual muscle fibers or cells. It's the same thing. Fibers and cells refer to the same thing within each fascicle. So these little individual muscle fibers are surrounded by endomyosin, which separate them from other cells. So again, it's like one of these little repeating patterns. Epimyosin is around the entire muscle. Then inside the muscle, there's these divisions called fascicles. They are surrounded by perimyosin that separates them from other fascicles. And then even inside the fascicles, there are individual muscle cells, and they're surrounded by endomyosin.